Righty, let's get started. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Kirsten Wyatt and I'm the Executive Director of ELGL, and I am pleased to moderate today's webinar, which is presented in partnership with ELGL with the Davenport Institute at Pepperdine University. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network, and we engage the brightest minds in local government. One of the ways we do this is to provide exceptional and free online training about local government topics for ELGL members. And we are so pleased to be partnering with the Davenport Institute, whose mission is to help build stronger communities by promoting public participation in local government. A recording of today's webinar will be saved on elgl.org and also on the Davenport Institute's website. We also are streaming this live onto the ELGL Facebook page. This is an interactive webinar. We have two amazing guests today, and you are welcome to ask your questions in the chat box while they're speaking, and at the end we'll open it up for more Q&A as well. Your microphones are muted at this point, but later on, please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to participate that way. So today's event is about how even at the best of times, authentic, inclusive, and effective public engagement looks very different than the traditional 3 minutes at a microphone public comment period. And so even after COVID-19 mandates are lifted, local government resources will be more limited, while complex issues such as housing, homelessness, workforce development, and the gig economy will only be amplified. So in order to address these challenges, local governments will have to do a better job of engaging a more diverse cross-section of residents as partners in both policymaking and program delivery. So we have an incredible duo on today's webinar to discuss and explore the creative ways that local leaders are investing in building community in the midst of this crisis so that their communities can come out stronger and better on the other side of this pandemic. So we are joined today by Mayor Lacey Beatty, the mayor of Beaverton, Oregon, and Brian Platt, the city manager of Kansas City, Missouri. So on behalf of ELGL, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And so let's get started. So Mayor Beatty and Brian, please introduce yourself, and in the spirit of this webinar series where we are revisiting local government COVID response 1 year later, tell us about your leadership over the past year.
Well, I guess I'll go first. And I do want to say, while Kirsten is an amazing moderator and dorky government official, she is also running for office, and today is election day. She is running for our local school board, so make sure you DM her good luck. It takes a lot to put yourself out there as an elected official. She didn't tell me not to do it, but I can sense on her face she didn't want me to, so I'm going to anyways. Running for office as a woman, running for office as a young person, running for office as a mom is really hard, and the pandemic has made it so much harder to connect with people. So I'm Lacey Beatty. I am the 34th mayor of Beaverton. I'm the first woman to serve in this role. It took an entire year of campaigning during COVID to get here, but we did. I beat a 30-year incumbent for this job, and I'm excited about some of the stuff we're doing. I know we're going to kind of get into that in the next couple of weeks, but high level, I'm a veteran. I'm married to an active duty military officer. I'm a mom of a crazy 3.5-year-old that's the light of our life, and I'm the mayor of one of the largest cities in Oregon.
Thank you. I'm Brian Platt. I'm the city manager for Kansas City, Missouri. I've just only been in the role for just under 6 months at this point, but previously I was the city manager for Jersey City, New Jersey. What's been interesting for me is that I've had the experience of managing a COVID response, not just in 2 cities, but in 2 states and in 2 very different political environments. And I'm looking forward to sort of talking more about that moving forward. But I also agree in that we should all be voting Wyatt for school board.
Well, thank you for that. Today is not about my small campaign. It's about the huge challenges in both of your communities. But let's get started by, something that's really amazing that's happened with both of you. And you've had huge career transitions in the midst of a global pandemic. For Mayor Beatty, getting elected to office. For Brian, moving across the country and taking on, I think, what is arguably one of the most prestigious city management jobs in the country. So talk to us about that transition and what that felt like to be campaigning for office, to be interviewing for a job, and then making those transitions. And Brian, why don't you get us started?
Sure. It was certainly a very sort of harrowing experience to do a move across country in the middle of a pandemic. You sort of get your routine down as far as knowing where you feel safe, places you can go and can't go, and what works and what doesn't work in wherever you are, and then having to restart that all in a new city. Much less thinking about in general just moving to a new place and not knowing where to get groceries or where the gym is or any of the basic stuff. But it was I think a great experience also because I was able to point to an ongoing response to COVID during my discussions here with leaders and officials in Kansas City and say that we had a great success managing this, that I hope I can help you do the same in Kansas City. And it's one of many instances where we find that cities across the country are all sort of facing the same types of challenges day to day. You go to any city and it's affordable housing, it's crime, it's homelessness, it's paving the streets. It's the same types of things. It's really just the differentiating factor is the context. In Kansas City, the state laws may be different than New Jersey. The political climate may want to push things a different way, but it's a lot of the same solutions that work in multiple places, which has been exciting for me, and that even though I'm coming to a new place, going through a big transition, I can point to a lot of the work I did and pull from it and say, and know from those experiences that there are things that work and don't work. And I've already had those discussions and gone through it already, that we don't have to do that again here in Kansas City.
So I left my job in public health to run for office. So I felt that my skills aligned perfectly for this moment. So I've spent my entire career from being a medic in the United States Army. I deployed during some of the initial invasion of Iraq. I served there. I was stationed in Europe. I've done a lot of third world medicine. I worked for a federally qualified health center here in Oregon prior to being the mayor. I did a lot of work getting our vaccines and clinics out to our migrant communities that move around Oregon. We're a very big agricultural state, although most people don't realize that. And I was the director of our school-based health centers. And so when I immediately took office, I didn't get to do the cool mayor rad things that everyone else gets to do, right? Like host all the coffees, meet people. Zoom made it nearly, like my chief of staff packed my days that I actually had to say like, hey, like I need 15 minutes to go to the bathroom and like shove something in my mouth between all these meetings. So I had more meetings than humanly possible, I think, than a regular, like if you're coordinating travel and doing that. And I had immense pressure from day one. People, when you beat an incumbent and they send you with a mandate to get things done, and people really wanted us to focus. So I got to work and coordinated one of the largest public-private partnerships for vaccine clinics here at Nike World Headquarters, which happens to be in Beaverton, Oregon. Local government is not experts in vaccine delivery, but our firefighters were, and partnering with a company like Nike that has global movement experience, we set up, they had a parking garage. And because it was owned by a private company, it did cool things like exit exhaust out through big fans. It was really big, it was lit. We could pump through 2,000 or 3,000 vaccines really quickly. And it meant that our firefighters didn't have to stand outside in the pouring rain, because it's Oregon in the spring and it's rain and the weather's terrible. And the county provided the doses. And that only happened because I held a mayor summit right away and just said, how do we do it better? How do we do it more efficiently? And if nobody needs the credit, can we actually get something done? And I just got a photo yesterday of the 40,000 dose they gave at that site from a person. The governor walked it with us and was like, can you guys do this forever? And so I think it was about doing things differently. Local government is slow to transition to anything. And so the idea that all of a sudden we're doing public health now, I did tons of listening sessions with our Chamber of Commerce and businesses. And then of course, everyone wanted to tell me how to do my job better than the last guy, what they wanted me to do. And in the middle of it, we had an interim city manager hiring for a full-time city manager. We changed our form of government. City Hall's been closed. Everyone thinks the mayor's in charge of everything, including the school board. So I was filtering tons of calls when our schools still weren't going back into place. But I really see the mayor as a unique elected position that everyone knows what the mayor is. Most people don't know no offense, school board members, state senators, they don't know the difference, but they know who the mayor is. They likely know who the governor is. And so they just call the first person or email the first person that they think understands it. So my job as mayor is really the convener of just bringing groups together to reimagine and think about things differently.
Well, that's a great segue into this next question. And, you know, from the start of the pandemic, or at least where we were a year ago to where we are now, what trends and observations and changes in community engagement have you noticed? And, you know, Mayor, you spoke of Zoom meetings. Brian, you talked about acclimating to a new community, but share with us some of the ways that you've watched your communities evolve or change in the way that they are engaging with their local government. And Brian, do you want to start us off on this one?
I'll start us off, yes. So I think it's actually, if there's been one benefit to this entire pandemic, it's that it has forced adoption of new technology that has already existed for people. So for example, we've all had, I guarantee you everyone in any city government has had Microsoft Teams on their computer for 2 years and had no idea what the thing was and never even clicked on the button. And suddenly we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're not allowed to meet in person and we're trying to figure out what to do. And it turns out there's this, you know, arguably great technology that everyone can use at your fingertips, integrated with your email and your phone and everything. And, you know, it forced us to move in a direction where we were resisting that change of leveraging more technology to help improve the way we do business because we didn't need to. And suddenly when we were forced into it, we all learned and it's great. And now everyone knows all the Zoom lingo and how to function between a WebEx and a GoToMeeting and a Zoom in the same day, and it all just worked for the most part. Works. I'm surprised I haven't muted myself accidentally here yet, but so it's been great in that sense that you know, we are now more digital and more remote and more accessible. And it also, I've seen in both cities that I've been in during this pandemic that community interaction and engagement has increased. It's easier now to join a public meeting, a council meeting, because you don't have to show up at City Hall and wait for 6 hours to the point in the agenda where you wanted to talk about something. You can just be at home and be watching TV and in the comfort of in bed, wherever you're going to be, and sort of just unmute when you want to speak and join from wherever you are. We saw in Jersey City in particular, it was probably 2 or 3 times the number of people coming to our public meetings and speaking at our public meetings. Just we had a very Parks and Rec style public speaking session in our council meetings where literally just anyone could talk about anything they want for 3 minutes. And that alone went from, you know, 10 to 15 people to 40 or 50 people in any given meeting, just because it was easier. It was easier to join and listen and watch from wherever you were. You didn't have to go through all these hoops. So I think it has been a big benefit to connect with communities. That being said, there are certainly some people and some communities that are being marginalized because of this. There are people that are not tech users and will not adopt technology like this. And you still have to pound the pavement and knock on doors and hand out flyers and put ads in the newspaper because there were less in-person interactions. There were certainly some people who were not as involved in the way that they used to be. So it's a balance, but I think net positive as far as expanding reach into new groups and with new people.
Yeah, I'm with Brian. We've seen a huge uptick in community engagement to us, not just live or watching the meetings as they're happening. I'm getting quite a few emails or Facebook messages or DMs about, hey, I was up late this morning, caught last night's council meeting. Can you explain X, Y, and Z? So not only are people watching and like that was always available, like the Granicus system that we use, like you could always have gone and archived and watched our meetings, but no one was really doing it before. Now people are at home making bread and doing podcasts and all those things, and also watching local government. We've seen a huge participation in issues like climate change, policing, wanting to be involved in the conversation, neighborhood meetings kind of uptick and go, which is important. And similar to Brian's point, the city of Beaverton, just in my first 100 days, we adopted our very first climate action task force. And so we're out for recruitment. And one of the things that I learned during the pandemic is that we can't knock on the door and talk to people. Oregon's still a pretty closed down state compared to other states. But we did like literature drop. We printed the flyer out, dropped it on people's front doors into a census tract that is traditionally underrepresented in Beaverton government. And we had a huge uptick in applications the next week. And so I think we have to balance, we're reaching more people, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that like not everyone is responding the same way. And if you're coming into your house from your car and you see a flyer taped to your front door, you might spend an extra 2 minutes looking at it versus if it comes in the junk mail wrapped in a postcard, like the city loves to mail things out to people, it kind of gets lost in the message. But if it's a standalone thing delivered to your front door saying, hey, our government wants you to participate in this climate action task force, will you consider applying? It was crazy, the uptick just that next week that we got. Of course, I'll have one for my book that I purchased later where people actually took the time to go in and write horrific applications that were just totally fake. And I wonder what those people are doing with their fair time. But I save those for late night chats by myself with a drink where I go back and look at those emails later.
Well, and thinking about underserved populations, thinking about hard to reach populations, I know that both of you are laser-like focused in your communities on addressing your unhoused populations. And, specifically in Beaverton, I know that you're, very concerned about the number of homeless teens that are in your community. Brian was recently on a GovLove podcast. I'll drop the link into the chat about the work that Kansas City, Missouri is doing around their unhoused population. But talk to us about those tougher topics and how you continue to make progress on things that are very, very challenging when traditional modes of communication, of working together, of working in the community are shut down or are changed indefinitely. And Mayor, why don't you get us started on this one?
I think I like to bring it back to one word that I constantly tell people when we're talking about our houseless population, which is dignity, right? How do we do things to bring dignity? So when COVID hit, we shut down all of those natural places, the library, the internet, all of our parks, bathrooms were locked and shuttered. What does that leave for people to do, right? Relieve themselves in public spaces, maybe in parks around children. And then, everyone's angry that's happening, but how did we to wrap dignity in the way that we delivered services? So the city partnered with organizations like Family Promise. We were the only government in the country to host houseless people in a building through a Family Promise model, which is where you go somewhere for 2 weeks, then you go somewhere else for 2 weeks. Typically it's done in churches. We don't have the biggest church population in Oregon that other places do. So we were able to open up a government building and have staff go and sleep at the shelter and deliver meals and do those kind of things. We opened up safe haven parking spots throughout the city. So that way, if you found yourself in a situation where you weren't housed, you could go park in a safe spot where there was security, bathrooms, showers, because dignity is really important. We are also in government right now in a once in a generational, in my opinion, infusement of money from the American Rescue Act funds. And that money is coming into cities and mayors across the country really lobbied for cities to get direct funding in this round because we understand our community better. We also understand how to deploy resources faster and better than other levels of government. I'm biased, I'm a mayor, so I think that. And so I've really been working with our state and county government on doing that. So I just got us $2 million to open a severe weather shelter that will be open year round. Home Plate Youth Services, which is our county's only center dealing with houseless youth. Beaverton, Oregon has the highest rate of teen homelessness in the state. It's not a statistic we're proud of, and we have Nike, Intel, and Columbia right here in our own backyard. And so we're helping them fundraise for their capital campaign for their building, because one of the other sides of COVID is that everyone else was able to shove this under the rug or it wasn't visible. Now these problems are visible. It's always been there. It's just people are paying attention. So how do we capitalize on this moment where people are paying attention? There's money coming into local government like never before. And how do we make a real dent in this? And that's kind of where I'm sitting at in the middle. I don't have all the answers, but I'm bringing people together so we can pull our funds and have a more direct impact with that money.
Yeah, that's well said, and I agree wholeheartedly that this is not, homelessness is not an issue that suddenly showed up because of the pandemic, but it certainly was exacerbated by it. And I'll give you some examples from Kansas City that we had over the winter. I mentioned this on the GovLove podcast too, as a little teaser, I guess, right, to get people to go over there. But we had some challenges with our warming centers during the winter. We had a single warming center in town, and the resources in that center were strained on two sides. One was that COVID social distancing restrictions made the facility such that we were limiting the number of people allowed inside. So we weren't allowed to have as many people inside to space them out. We also had more people seeking services. And for one reason or another, the pandemic has pushed more people out into the streets. A lot of the people in the homeless community here and everywhere are not the stereotype that people unfortunately associate with homeless people. They're not, people who have been living under a bridge for 30 years who are suffering from mental illness and may have a lot of other issues. There are mostly people out there who are trying to get by, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who possibly likely have a job. They just couldn't make it work to cover all their bills for a little while. And so a lot of people that were showing up at our shelters were going to work during the day. They had somewhere to be, and they were trying to move things forward for themselves. So, but the pandemic exacerbated that. So we've had to reframe our approach a little bit and think outside the box and take some more aggressive steps to find larger facilities, to find more transitional housing, to find more permanent housing. We've taken a lot of steps here in Kansas City. One was opening the region's largest warming center. We used our convention center. We could have, if we needed to, fit thousands of people in there, but we never got to that point. But when you talk about communication in the age of COVID, what's been interesting is the communication within this community is fairly substantial in a sense. We didn't really do a lot of extra outreach when we opened the warming center, the new warming center, the larger warming center. We started with 50 people that we knew on night one, and we ended with 350 on average a night, 400 a night. And not everyone was coming every night. People would come there for a few weeks and then find something and move on. So we probably served a couple thousand people over the winter. And what's interesting is we didn't actually do a lot of promotion of it, but the word of mouth spreads. A lot of people in the shelters know each other. They have formed communities with each other. They have each other's cell phone numbers. They have ways to communicate. And so that's what they were doing. The word was spreading in one way or another throughout those communities. And I think one thing that we forget about communication is how people get their information. It's one thing to, have the mayor tweet something, but there's no mayor that everyone in a city follows on Twitter. That's just never going to happen. Even the mayors with the most followers, a lot of those followers are not from the city. And think about how many people end up voting and maybe not voting for a different candidate who don't want to follow that mayor, who don't care about politics. There are a lot of other alternative ways that we've been talking about to communicate with people. One of the big ones is word of mouth. And one of the things that we were exploring in Jersey City, was trying to access word of mouth sub communities through like WhatsApp or text messages. And there are some communities out there, particularly the Indian American community from India, that we found in Jersey City that they do a lot of their communicating through WhatsApp. They don't follow social media. They don't necessarily read the newspapers that we're posting articles in. But if I send a message on WhatsApp to somebody I know in that community, in 25 minutes, it's in, the phone of hundreds of people who are just sharing it with each other. And that's sort of the way that we were thinking it was happening with our homeless community here in Kansas City, in that we weren't necessarily knocking on the doors of all the places we thought homeless people were staying or like putting flyers out in encampments. They were communicating with each other. We got in touch with the right people, the right sort of facilitators of that information. So yeah, it's been an interesting endeavor.
Well, and I appreciate how both of you have shared examples where it's not like obviously both of your communities are very adept at digital communications, but with the mayor sharing the door hanger approach in communities historically underrepresented in city government, Brian, talking about using tools like WhatsApp and really finding out what people use for word of mouth. It's pretty exceptional to think about those like huge pivots that you've made that maybe you wouldn't have had to do if everything was clicking along as normal. Share with us some of the other big challenges that your communities have faced in the past year, and then how did COVID change your engagement response or your communications in dealing with those larger challenges? And Brian, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I think the big challenge that I face in both cities was that as I said before, COVID exacerbated some challenges people were facing in both communities. It also further restricted our ability to spend money. And so when we're looking at a budget that has been decimated and we're down 10 or 15% in our revenues, and we're trying to cut costs everywhere, we're trying to, find ways to identify savings and restructure departments and operations, renegotiate contracts, all these things to save money, then we also have to turn around and say, well, we need to invest more in certain things. Certain things are so crucial to supporting the people of the city that was probably the biggest push and pull that we've had, and we still are fighting with. And even through our American Rescue Plan budget that we're looking at here in Kansas City, we're still trying to find that balance of backfilling our reserves and getting our city back to normal, but also investing more in homeless services, in affordable housing, in basic necessity services that people need here. So, I think it's a political discussion, and it's a lot more. There's a lot more involvement from the council members and the mayor and community leaders, and everyone has their idea of a program that's going to best serve their local community in their neighborhood. But there's not enough money to go around to do all those things. And so that's been the biggest challenge, I think, on the COVID side. Communicating the value and balancing act that we have to engage in here has been a challenge as well, because, we're not having these large group meetings where everyone can throw out their idea and talk about it all at once. We're having a lot of one-off conversations. I'm meeting with individual community leaders, and we're having, a meeting with one community group and talking about it. But then that same meeting has to occur with a lot of community groups. And we have to talk about the need for, the small pot of money that has to go a really long way. And also, when we look at the amount of money that we received as a city, and every city, I think we all sort of at first were like, this is awesome. This is a huge amount of money. Maybe it's too much. But I think very quickly, we also realize it's maybe not enough. There are still plenty of people who are unemployed. There are plenty of challenges we need to solve here. There are, of course, a lot of great things that we can do. And it's an opportunity, yes, to build things and do things and take forward steps. But we can't forget about the peril we were in. I mean, the terrible financial situation that we were in for a long time, and we may not be done with it. So there's a balancing act, and I think there's going to be some disappointment for people across the board as we make a lot of these tough decisions.
I want to go a different direction than what Brian was talking about as the elected official, but I do want to hit on that because I was on the local news earlier this week talking about American Rescue Act money, and I got a boatload of emails from community members watching that was like, how dare you not lay off local government people, and now you're using this money to backfill your own reserve. And I'm like, cool, we pivoted people that were like circulating in library to like drive trucks, and it's we in our city made a decision not to lay people off, but it meant we had to reorganize and move people around and work with our union so that way, work with us. We want to like move people around. You're going to have to do a job, other duties as assigned. And so we did really well. So a lot of that money and the fight that cities did was to be able to backfill, because everything that I always tell people, if we voted based on truly what impacted our life the most, the mayor, your school board, your county commissioners, they'd be at the top of your ballot and the president would be at the bottom, because the second you back out of your driveway to your drive to work, all of that is touched by local government. And if you don't want potholes, and you want the grass mowed, and you don't want to see homelessness, and you want a library book, and you want to have internet access, and you want to have running water, we need to backfill our reserves to do it. So I don't think I could have said it better than Brian. I just wanted to echo that. The other piece that I think from COVID that has been incredibly different started with the murder of George Floyd. And from an elected official where the community was outcrying, Oregon and Beaverton is the most diverse city in the Northwest. We had our community members demanding we have conversations about policing. And I think having those conversations via Zoom, Teams, all these other aspects we miss the human element of being able to look at someone and convey a feeling and an understanding. And I hear you, and it doesn't come across the same in this digital format. And people, I think, are afraid of being videotaped. And so they don't want to come into these conversations and speak truth to power because it's forever versus, I mean, it could always happen in a room. People get out their phones, but I think it's less likely in a one-on-one conversation with the elected official where you are living your trauma out loud, maybe talking about something you've experienced. You're not willing to do that in this format. And so we've struggled in our city council, and me as the mayor have taken over, like making that meaningful first step in police reform. I think it's every elected official's responsibility to be looking at community safety through a different lens. I'm a veteran. I was married to a military police officer. You know, I think we just have to do things differently and ask the question, do we have the right people doing the right work? When you call 911, is the appropriate response showing up? And so that conversation has been so hard in this format, and we're still having it. And we did a lot of prep work when the Chauvin trial results were, put out. What were we going to say as the city? What was I going to say as the mayor? What was our council going to say in a unified voice? What did our staff need to hear? What did the community need to hear? What did our police department need to hear? And all of that has been harder. And so from my mind, that's really taken a huge chunk of my first 4 months in office is dealing with this piece, and COVID has just made it nearly impossible.
Anything to add on that front, Brian? And I'll just put in a shameless plug. We just opened the application period right now for ELGL cohorts. Over the summer, we are going to be doing a 6-week course on reevaluating police budgeting, especially using an equity lens. We know this is a topic that many of our members are dealing with, are looking at. So thank you, Mayor Beatty, for bringing that up. Brian, anything else to add? I know that your work both in Jersey City and Kansas City have focused on social equity and inclusion, so I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so I'm coming from a city, Jersey City, which gets ranked on some of these online surveys as being one of, or if not the most diverse city in the country year after year. It's a city where Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty technically have addresses in Jersey City. It's the gateway for immigrants to the rest of the country. Dozens of languages spoken, 40% of the population there is foreign born. It doesn't really get more diverse than that. And so equity, and Kansas City has different types of diversity, I'd say. It's not quite as ethnically diverse here, but there are lots of different types of diversity in any city and in every city. And we are having certainly some issues when it comes to equity and diversity and to be honest and frank racism, historic racism that's existed here for many, many years that we're trying to unwind from. And it's not something that I'm going to come in here and be able to solve in a few months and probably not even a few years. It's a cultural shift, not just within city government, but across the city, an approach to interacting with our neighbors and creating more inclusive and supportive environments. So we are in the process of hiring the city's first chief equity officer. It's a new but not so new sort of trend that's starting across the city, a person that is going to be tasked with specifically making sure that we are building a supportive and inclusive environment for our employees, but also hoping that that environment transcends out into the broader population and that we can create an environment where we are better reflecting the people that we're serving here in Kansas City. And the day before I started this new job, an article came out in the Kansas City Star about racism and discrimination in the fire department. And it was a signal to me that this was going to be one of the top priorities for me and for us coming in. And so we've certainly tried to do a lot along those lines in a very challenging environment. It's hard to do a lot of feedback, when we really aren't supposed to be having an individual in-person meetings, but also it is a little easier to do feedback, as we were talking about before, with the ability to jump on video calls and interact with people all over the place without having to, move around and travel and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think there have certainly been a lot of new initiatives that are coming out of this as well.
We talked about some really big, heavy challenges today, but I'd love to hear more about some of those kind of silver lining moments that you've experienced where your local government has become more effective or efficient because of digital services, because of remote engagement. Anything that jumps out or comes to mind as really something that has benefited for the long haul the cities of Beaverton and Kansas City. And Mayor, why don't you get us started?
I'm trying to think, because I feel like we've done everything different. I think, for us, where I think we're seeing a lot of engagement is in our neighborhood associations. I know not every city in the country has them, and they're really meant to be more around land use, and they've really divulged into other issues. But we have, in our heart of our downtown where our library is, we have a fountain, and it's one of the only free splash pads in the city. It really is, we consider it the jewel of Beaverton. And we're having to remodel it this year. So it's been a really big deal. And across from our library, we're building an affordable senior housing project, which is taking the place of a community center. And when you hear community center, you think thriving, awesome area where people are hanging out. That's not what our community center was. But on next door and all of these avenues, people were upset that we were torching a community center to build affordable housing for seniors, and the fountain was going to be closed, and we were doing this other not connected to the city at all development project that was just market rate stuff that was happening. And so we were just, I tend not to dive into the Nextdoor app, but once a week I make my chief of staff just put my name in it to see what kind of bubbles up to the surface so we can know. And people were angry about all of this stuff happening on Fifth Street. And so we decided to do a town hall. We did it in a Zoom format, and we had massive engagement from community members that I don't think ever would have turned out to City Hall to hear us talk about it. And it was also a good reminder to me as an elected official and to staff on call. Sometimes we're having conversations about big projects, and in our city, we do one-on-ones with elected officials. So they start there. And sometimes we're doing work sessions or project sessions, or sometimes we're talking about real estate in executive session. And so for me, there's a timeline of us talking about all of these buildings, but when you match it to a public timeline, how many times in public were we talking about this? I started to realize we weren't, we missed the boat. We weren't connecting them. We weren't putting all of these three projects together in the same format. And so it was really late in the process, which then some people were angry because some of the land use stuff was too far down the pipeline. But it was a reminder to me that we have really great tools that we should be doing early and utilizing neighborhood associations through this digital platform to have some of these conversations.
I think for me and for us, a big silver lining has been with the budget and fiscal responsibility. I think that there are probably plenty of people out there who work in city government that could tell you, if asked, what are some ways we could try to save money? What could we do to cut the budget, to right size funding for certain things, and that sort of thing. And I think the challenge with a lot of that is that there's typically not the political appetite or the public will to engage in some of those efforts, just because people want to avoid the fight. For example, if you're going to be renegotiating contracts and cutting money out of some contract, everyone would expect that the vendor is going to put up a fight. And who knows what the contract is, but that's inevitably going to happen if it's a big contract. During COVID, it was very easy for us in both cities, to be honest. The same thing happened, to point to COVID and say, look, we just don't have the funds. It's COVID. It's a really tough year. We have to cut this. We have to take $1 million out of this contract, or we have to renegotiate this thing and change the shifts for this other thing. And it was very easy to glide through that process and have little to no resistance on a lot of those changes because of it. It allowed us to, in Jersey City, I remember thinking we had all these levers to pull to save money in the budget, waiting on standby until the time was right. And this was the time. We did all of these things to just save a bunch of money right away. And came to Kansas City, same thing. People knew here exactly what we could and should be doing to right size the budget and to cut some costs. It's just, we were waiting for the right time. And so that was a big silver lining. My hope is that in here and also in cities across the country, that we don't just revert back to the way we were doing things because we have all this funding again. That we're not just saying, oh, well, we got stimulus money, so we're just going to restore everyone's budget and call it a day. This is an opportunity to right size things and to make things more efficient and to better serve our communities through this process.
And I'll remind our audience that this is a great time for you to start thinking of your own questions. You can either drop those into the chat or soon we'll give you a chance to unmute and ask the mayor and Brian yourself. But to kind of kick off the Q&A portion, would love to just hear what you have on the horizon. I mean, the world is changing, you know, every single day. It seems like we have new guidance, new information. Sometimes it's really confusing about reopening, but what's on the horizon for the second half of 2021 in your communities, and what will you be working on and really focused on?
I can kick it off. Am I in? Yes, okay. So as I said before, I've only been here about just under 6 months. And I think the first few months we're focusing on housing, homelessness, affordable housing, but also some of the basics within city government, street resurfacing, potholes, snow removal, you know, just getting all of the basic foundational core elements of city government in place. Moving forward over the next few months, not to say that all those things are fixed by any means, no, we are moving in the right direction in a lot of ways, but our work is not done. But I think over the next few months, the plan is to focus on some of the nice to haves, you know, sustainability elements of government, conversion to electric vehicles, seeking more green energy sources, sort of consolidating our use of municipal vehicles, stuff that sort of, you know, are things that, you know, if you think about like the analogy of a burning building, once you put the fire out, then you can start to repair the building. The first few months sort of like trying to put the fire out, and most of it's gone, I guess. But now we're thinking about repairing and rebuilding this building to be even more functional and more efficient. And you know, we last week we just launched a Vision Zero campaign here in Kansas City. I've had the pleasure to do this in 2 cities now. It's a lot of fun. So we've got a lot of pedestrian safety initiatives and protected bike lanes to install across the city. And so that's, I think, going to be the focus for the next few months. But, you know, there's also, it's important not to forget COVID at this point. We are not out of the woods, even though the CDC last week just sort of woke up and decided that all the rules were just going to be gone. And I know we're all dealing with this. And I know Mayor Lucas here in Kansas City has been all over the national news talking about it. And that is going to be something we're watching very closely. We're struggling here trying to balance the fact that there are basically no longer emergency health orders in Missouri or Kansas, which is right next to Kansas City, and that we are now facing a non-standardized approach where you might have to wear a mask here but not there, and we're trying to think about the ways to best keep our city employees safe, knowing that no matter what we do internally, even if we get every single employee vaccinated, people are coming off the street and coming in to access city services and come in public meetings. And how do we keep ourselves safe in those situations too? And unfortunately, there isn't a clear right answer. I've had a lot of conversations with people, including conversations with people from some other cities, and it's just very unclear what we're all going to do at this point. So I think, though, that as in the beginning of the pandemic, you know, you do have to just think critically and be able to be responsive and adaptive to what's going to be happening, and we just have to make decisions and move forward and sort of iterate as we move forward.
Well, Brian started speaking directly to my heart when he was talking about protected pedestrian bike lanes and Project Zero. So I think, obviously, I'm a multimodal mayor. I got an electric scooter. I ride my bike. I run. I do all those things. One of the best kind of pivots that I think we did in COVID was all the outdoor dining and really relaxing some of our community code around like how many people can be on a sidewalk. We shut down a street in our city, which was like heresy, that we gave up 6 parking spots in our core to make this really cool outdoor dining space, and it was really hip and cool. And you know, just I go out there on Friday night and just the vibrancy of like these businesses, because we could be outside, like I would be totally fine like never eating in a restaurant again. I want to sit outside. I don't care. I'm from Oregon. I'll put a raincoat on, pop up a tent. But like having like putting pedestrians first for the first time over vehicles was a huge step for us. And then we realized all the safety stuff. We block off on a major road. Like what happens when, your drunk uncle stumbles off the sidewalk, or your 3-year-old runs away out of your stuff. So now we're starting to think about, how do we put up attractive barriers that aren't orange, roadside barriers? How do we integrate art into these things? And so that piece, I think, is really exciting. But similar to Brian, I mean, we woke up to a boomerang. Our county was in high risk, and then it was on low risk, and then it was, no, you don't have to wear a mask, and we don't want to prove, like, who's not going to wear masks? People that weren't vaccinated. And so how do we, and I get to be political, everyone else here is government employees, so they don't get to talk about politics, but I will for a minute. I'm going to continue to wear a mask because my 3-year-old's not eligible to be vaccinated. My immunocompromised neighbor has not been able to be vaccinated. And we haven't been sick in a year, like just normal. My 3-year-old was sick last week, and I was instantly reminded how terrible it is to have a sick 3-year-old that wakes you up every 90 minutes just going, I'm a sick kid. And like, it was horrible. So we can mask up. Like, I think, I'm a patriot at my core. I'm a veteran. I think that it's the most American thing to do to protect other people. Our country has a dedicated history of putting other people first. And like, this is a very logical place, because where it's putting pressure, business owners having to enforce rules that they don't understand or maybe don't agree with. And the fear of, like, I own a coffee shop. If somebody comes in without a mask, do I know they've been vaccinated? Are they going to get me sick? Like, they're putting their life on their line. We're right back to the start of the pandemic. We're right back to the fear where we were, where every person you interacted with, you didn't know would kill you or not. And we did a disservice, CDC. And I'm not the city manager. I don't have to make the decision about opening the building. That's Brian and Kirsten and all of you other government officials that have to weigh to be politically astute enough to like respond to your community and not be political and have a conversation about a mask. But then like, you have the immense responsibility of all your employees' safety and their family and their children in your community. So sometimes things are political when they're not political, and sometimes they are. And I think this mask mandate is really hard. Our county just barely missed the 75th percentile for vaccination, so we won't be fully opened on Memorial Day. I think we have a unique opportunity to think about 4th of July, and can we get vaccinated? And so how do we incentivize people from a government perspective to get vaccinated, which isn't our traditional role? And how do we support local businesses? Do we put money in a pot where you could get a free beer? Like, do we put money in a pot where you get a slice of pizza, where we can stimulate the economy and encourage vaccinations? That's what we're working through in our legal department. So I would like to be able to buy buy beer vouchers from our local emerging brewery scene here. And if you've been vaccinated, go ahead and take your card down there. That would be awesome. So those are things that I'm thinking about. And some of that, stimulus money we're getting, maybe it can be used for that.
Well, and again, for our audience, please feel free to chime in and ask your own question, but let's use that segue into engaging your business community. Obviously, there have been huge ups and downs as it relates to business communities, economic development, doing enough or not enough from a government perspective to support businesses. Talk to us about this past year. How have some of your approaches to economic development, business retention, business recruitment changed during COVID, and what might stick around and continue to be a factor in how you make Kansas City and Beaverton places that businesses want to locate? And Mayor, why don't you go first?
So we got money out the door instantly out of our general fund. We were one of the very first cities in Oregon to do it. And it wasn't a lot. I mean, it was like $500,000, but to come out of a general fund, that's quite a bit of money for a city of 100,000 people. And we really, 70% of the funding went out to minority-owned, women-owned businesses. Our first round, we learned a lot. It wasn't the best. We kicked money out. It was our initial relationships that we had with people. Then in the second and the third and the fourth round that we did, we got more sophisticated. We realized like we were rewarding businesses that maybe had a good relationship with the city, and maybe we weren't, going down to the mom and pop bodegas that really had no reason to interact with us before. So we, through our Chamber of Commerce, worked on a business recovery center that was partly funded through our county, partly funded through us, that could have a really laser focused eye on minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, smaller businesses, less than 10 or 15 employees, to really go out and find them and engage them in the conversation. And we didn't just give them money, we gave them coaching, we gave them other opportunities, and to really tell us like where they were struggling. And it really helped us lobby the governor and the state to work on not just residential eviction moratorium, which I proudly passed like right away after the pandemic, but commercial eviction moratorium, so we can make sure that our businesses, we invested a lot in restaurants, and those were some of the hardest hit. And so we worked on that really early in the pandemic. I would hope that all of this work, this door-to-door guerrilla marketing, reaching out to our community, that we are able to protect that Rolodex and have relationships with them beyond these emergency conversations.
Yeah, that we had sort of a similar experience, but I think also in general, we shifted from trying to attract people to the city to sort of helping people just not leave, and not necessarily leave, but just close down. You know, we had a lot of small businesses on the brink, and I think every city did, and it was a challenging time to move as quickly as we could to get money into the hands of people that had no business coming in the door anymore, or very little business, not enough to sustain things. And, you know, we had a lot of conversations with business owners and employees and other stakeholders to try and figure out what's the best way to support small businesses in particular through this whole crisis. The larger ones, the corporations, you know, they have a little bit more inelasticity as far as their cash reserves and ability to sort of weather a storm like this. The small businesses, a lot of them are just sort of like paycheck to paycheck. And if you have a few bad weeks, then, you know, that's it. Can't pay the rent anymore. So I think that the initial stimulus round was super helpful, as Mayor Beatty said, that like, we really couldn't get money out the door fast enough. On the other side of it though, you know, there were plenty of examples of like the money not being enough and maybe going to businesses that were going to close anyway. You know, that they were like, right, paying out people their last paycheck with that stimulus money and then closing up shop, and that was it. And some of that is from businesses that maybe were not going to make it anyway, and this just sort of sped up the process. But either way, it's a challenge. It's difficult. It's difficult to see like us not able to really help people who are in need and try to be helping and it not being enough. But I think even over the last couple of months, we've pivoted quite a bit from trying to rescue people and throwing out lifelines to going back to normal and trying to attract new events and new business and new corporations and fill up our office spaces and that sort of thing. One of the very interesting challenges in more urban areas is office buildings. What is going to be the future of work? People are very comfortable in remote work environments. And, you know, even though like the CDC just decided that the pandemic's over, you know, people are not all just going to suddenly start showing up to the office 9 to 5 every day. That there's more flexibility in the workplace. And you know what, to be honest, in our city government, we're not ever going to ask everyone to come back every day if they don't have to. Of course, there's some people that are, you know, firefighters, police officers, pothole crews, they have to report to the work site. But, you know, administrative staff and planners and architects and things that work that can be done in other places, we're going to be flexible with that. But what happens to our office buildings? Are we basically going to be turning into a bunch of WeWorks across the city? Are people going to want to keep office space but then sublease out to smaller companies? We don't know, and that's been sort of a big question mark for us moving forward. How are we going to continue to build the economic activity and not just let it all dissipate and turn into a totally remote work environment for office buildings?
Well, and on that cliffhanger of a huge topic, I think we could spend another hour talking about. I do want to be respectful of people's time. I think if anything, this has just shown us that we need to have City Manager Brian Platt and Mayor Beatty back on more webinars to share perspectives from their communities. Your leadership is inspiring, and thank you for giving us so many things to talk about. A quick reminder for everyone here, ELGL pop-up conferences are on Friday. So you can go to elglpopups.com. These are half-day virtual conferences with regional topics covered on the agenda. So please head over, register today. It's a great way to continue some great conversations about how communities are providing essential services during this critical time. And so with that, we will wrap up today's webinar. We will have a recording online. We'll also send a copy of that to you, as well as some information about the Davenport Institute at Pepperdine University, so you can learn more about the work they do, some of the excellent training programs that they offer. So with that, I want to say a huge thank you to Brian and Lacey. We're so glad you could be here with us today. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.